Hello, everyone. Welcome to English Insights. Today, we will explore an important part of Vietnam's history, from the late 1800s to 1975. This is a long story about a small country that never gave up, fighting for freedom and independence against much stronger powers. Through this journey, you will learn about a 100-year struggle of the Vietnamese people to defend their homeland, and also about the support they received from peace-loving friends around the world. This history is not only important for Vietnam, but also for understanding the world. This video will not only give you knowledge about history, but also help you practice your English listening skills. Now, let's get started. Part 1. The French Invasion and a New Era, 1858 to 1930s. Before the French came, Vietnam was a country with its own emperor. It was a country that had a long history and a strong culture. But in the mid-1800s, European countries were looking for new places to get resources and to sell their products. This time was called the Age of Colonialism. In 1858, the French military came to Vietnam. They attacked the city of Da Nang with their powerful ships. At first, the Vietnamese military fought back, and the French could not take over the country quickly. But the French had much better weapons. They had powerful guns and ships. The Vietnamese military had old weapons, and they could not stop the French for long. The French moved to the south and took control of a region called Cochinchina. Over the next 25 years, the French slowly took control of all of Vietnam. The Nguyen dynasty officially recognized the French protectorate in 1884 with the signing of the Paternoster Treaty. By 1887, all of Vietnam was under French control, and the French also controlled Laos and Cambodia. These three countries together were called French Indochina. France ruled Vietnam for a very long time, and life under colonial control was very hard for the local people. The main goal of the rulers was to make money, so resources like rice, coal, and rubber were taken away. Farmers and workers had to labor on large plantations and in mines for very low pay. New cities and new roads were built, but these projects mainly served the foreigners and their businesses. Local people were not allowed to hold important positions in the government or the military. The Vietnamese were treated like second-class citizens in their own land. People grew unhappy and longed to live in freedom again. What they wanted most was to take back their own country. During this time, many Vietnamese people started to fight against the French. There were many small groups that fought. Some people fought with weapons, and some people wrote books and poems to encourage people to love their country and to fight for their freedom. But the French military was very strong, and they stopped all of these rebellions. Many Vietnamese leaders were killed or put in prison. However, the desire for freedom did not die. The seeds of revolution were planted. In the 1920s and 1930s, new ideas came from other parts of the world. New leaders began to appear. These leaders had new ideas about how to fight the French. They learned about new political ideas, like communism, which was an idea about how to create a society where all people were equal. These new leaders and new ideas would change the history of Vietnam forever. One of these leaders was a man who would become one of the most famous figures in the world, Ho Chi Minh. Part 2, The Fight for Freedom, begins 1930s to 1945. The story of Vietnam's fight for independence cannot be told without mentioning Ho Chi Minh. Born in 1890, he spent his youth traveling to many parts of the world, including France and the United States. During these years abroad, he observed how people lived and how much freedom they enjoyed. The long journey also gave him time to study different ways to start a revolution. Over time, he became a strong believer in communism, an idea that promised to help the poor and give power to ordinary people. To him, this was the best path to winning Vietnam's freedom. In 1930, Ho Chi Minh helped to create a new political party called the Indochinese Communist Party. This party was created to fight against the French and to make Vietnam an independent country again. But for many years, the party was small and secret. It was very dangerous to be a member. The French police were always looking for people who were against their rule. The big chance for the Vietnamese revolutionaries came during World War II. In 1940, Japan, a very powerful country in Asia, invaded Vietnam. The Japanese military took control of Vietnam from the French, but the French were still there. So, for a few years, Vietnam was ruled by both the Japanese and the French. The Vietnamese people were treated badly by both. The Japanese took a lot of Vietnam's rice to feed their soldiers. This caused a very bad famine, which is when there is not enough food for people to eat. Around 2 million Vietnamese people died from hunger. The Japanese occupation showed the Vietnamese people that they were still not free. This made more and more people angry and ready to fight. Ho Chi Minh and his political party saw this as a great opportunity. The French were weak, and the Japanese were hated by the people. In 1941, Ho Chi Minh returned to Vietnam after many years away. He returned to a province in the north called Chao Bang. At here, he created a new group called the Viet Minh, short for the League for the Independence of Vietnam. The Viet Minh was a group of people who wanted to fight against both the French colonialist and the Japanese fascist to gain independence for Vietnam. It was not just for communists. It was for anyone who wanted to fight for a free Vietnam. The resistance forces trained soldiers while hiding in the jungles and mountains. Support also came from the United States, which was fighting against Japan during World War II. This was a very strange relationship. The United States was helping a communist group, but at that time, they were just allies against a common enemy, Japan. When Japan was about to lose the war in 1945, the Viet Minh was ready. The time for revolution had come. Part 3. The August Revolution and the First Indochina War, 1945 to 1954. In August of 1945, Japan was defeated in World War II. The Japanese army was told to stop fighting. This left a power vacuum in Vietnam. There was no one in charge. The French were not yet strong enough to come back and take control. The Japanese had lost. This was the perfect moment for the Viet Minh. On August 19, 1945, the Viet Minh, led by Ho Chi Minh, started the August Revolution. They came out of the jungles and went to the big cities. People all over the country supported them. The August Revolution was very fast and very successful. The Viet Minh took control of the capital city, Hanoi. They also took control of the other major cities. The Vietnamese emperor, Bao Dai, saw that the people wanted a new government. He decided to step down and give his power to the new government. It was a time of great excitement and hope for the Vietnamese people. After nearly 100 years of being ruled by a foreign country, Vietnam was free again. On September 2, 1945, Ho Chi Minh stood in a big square in Hanoi. He stood in front of a huge crowd of people. He read the Declaration of Independence of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. In this declaration, he said that all people have a right to be free and to live their own lives. He talked about freedom and independence. The declaration was a very important moment for Vietnam. It showed the world that Vietnam was now a free country. However, the French wanted to come back. After the war, the Allied forces came to Vietnam to officially disarm the Japanese army. Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese Nationalist Army came to the north of the 16th parallel. In the south of the 16th parallel, the British were in charge. The British's main role was to disarm the Japanese, and during this time, they facilitated the return of the French to take control. The French army replaced the British army and began to fight against the Viet Minh. Ho Chi Minh tried to talk to the French and find a peaceful solution, but the French wanted to rule Vietnam again. So, in 1946, the First Indochina War began. It was a war between the Viet Minh and the French. The war lasted for almost 8 years. The French had a very modern army. They had planes, tanks, and big guns. The Vietnamese fighters knew the country very well. Using guerrilla warfare, they hid in the jungles and mountains, striking the French army by surprise. This kind of fighting was very difficult for the French army to fight against. The war was very long and very hard for both sides. The war ended with a very famous battle, the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. The French army built a big fort in a valley called Dien Bien Phu. They thought they were in a very safe place. But the Viet Minh, led by a smart general named Vo Nguyen Giap, brought their cannons up into the mountains. They surrounded the French fort. After a long and difficult battle, the Viet Minh won. The French army was defeated. This battle was a very big surprise for the whole world. A small, poor country had defeated a big, powerful country. After this battle, the French government decided to end the war. A meeting was held in Geneva, Switzerland, to decide the future of Vietnam. Part 4. A Country Divided, 1954 to 1960s. In 1954, after the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu, a meeting was held in Geneva, Switzerland, to end the war. The meeting was called the Geneva Accords. The people at the meeting made a decision. Vietnam would be divided into two sides. There would be a North Vietnam and a South Vietnam. The line between the two sides would be at the 17th parallel. This was a temporary decision. The plan was that in 2 years, in 1956, there would be an election for all of Vietnam. The election would unite the country under one government. But this election never happened. This was because of a big global event called the Cold War. After World War II, the world was divided into two main groups, one led by the United States and its allies, representing capitalism and democracy, and another led by the Soviet Union and its allies, representing communism. The U.S. believed in the domino effect, meaning that if one country in a region became communist, others would follow. Because of this fear, the U.S. did not want Vietnam to be united under a communist government. The North was led by Ho Chi Minh and his Communist Party. In the South, a new government was formed. It was a government that was directly supported by the United States. The leader was a man named Ngo Dinh Diem. The United States was very worried about the spread of communism and wanted a government in the South that would fight against it. Ngo Dinh Diem's government was very harsh. He wanted to get rid of anyone who was against his rule. He passed a very strict law called 1059. The law's purpose was to denounce communist and kill communist, and it was used to arrest and kill many people, including those who had fought against the French and were now working for peace. This caused a lot of anger and fear in the South. Because of Diem's actions, a new group was formed in the South to fight against his government. This group was called the National Liberation Front, NLF. They wanted to overthrow Diem and unite the country. The U.S. and Diem's government called this group the Viet Cong. The name Viet Cong was a nickname they used for all people fighting against Diem's government in the South. It was a simple name for a big group of different people. The Viet Cong used guerrilla warfare, just like the Viet Minh had used against the French. They were very good at hiding in the jungles and making surprise attacks. The conflict between the North and South and between Diem's army and the Viet Cong slowly became a bigger and bigger war. The United States sent more and more military advisors to help the South, but it was not enough. The war was getting worse and worse. In 1963, Ngo Dinh Diem was overthrown and killed in a coup. The new government was not very stable, and the situation in South Vietnam became even more difficult. The United States realized that if they did not get more involved, the Viet Cong would win. The war was getting bigger, and the United States was about to become a major part of it. Part 5. The American Invasion of Vietnam, 1960s to 1973. The war between North and South Vietnam began to change in the early 1960s. The United States, led by President Lyndon B. Johnson, decided to get much more involved. The U.S. government was looking for a reason to begin a full military operation in Vietnam. In 1964, the U.S. claimed that their ships had been attacked by North Vietnamese forces in the Gulf of Tonkin. This event was used by the U.S. government as a pretext to justify its actions. The United States officially invaded Vietnam to stop the spread of communism. To support its invasion, the U.S. called on its allies to send troops to fight alongside them. The American military and its allies fought against the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong. The countries that sent troops to help the U.S. included South Korea, Australia, Thailand, New Zealand, and the Philippines. The United States had planes, helicopters, big guns, and tanks. A very powerful army. Many in the American military believed the war would be over quickly because their forces seemed far stronger than the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong. But this belief turned out to be wrong. The Viet Cong Army understood the land better than anyone. They made effective use of guerrilla warfare, striking quickly and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. A vast network of underground tunnels was also built, allowing them to hide and move safely from place to place. The American Army was not used to fighting this kind of war. It was very difficult and very confusing. In 1968, a very important event happened. It was a huge attack by the Viet Cong. This attack is known as the Tet Offensive. The attack happened all over South Vietnam at the same time, even in big cities like Saigon. The American and South Vietnamese military were surprised. They were able to fight back and win on the battlefield, but the Tet Offensive had a huge effect on the people in the U.S. The U.S. government had told the American people that they were winning the war and that the enemy was weak, but the Tet Offensive showed that the enemy was still very strong and could attack anywhere, anytime. Because of the Tet Offensive, many people in the U.S. began to strongly protest the war. They did not want the U.S. to be in Vietnam anymore. People all over the world also began to oppose the war. The U.S. government realized that it was losing support and that it was a very costly war with too many American soldiers dying. This made the U.S. leaders start to think about how to leave Vietnam. The Tet Offensive was the start of the U.S. looking for a way to gradually pull out of the war. This led to a new plan called Vietnamization, where the U.S. would train the South Vietnamese Army to fight on its own, so that U.S. soldiers could go home. The fighting was very intense, especially in 1972. There were big battles, like the ones in Quang Tri, which was a very important city. The North Vietnamese Army launched a big attack in Quang Tri, and the fighting there was very heavy for many months. As the war continued, the United States government began to look for a way to end it. The peace talks in Paris were not going well, so, in December 1972, the U.S. launched a huge bombing campaign called Operation Linebacker II. The goal was to force the North Vietnamese to agree to the peace deal. In this campaign, the U.S. used its most powerful weapon, the B-52 Flying Fortress. These large bombers were a symbol of America's military power, but the Vietnamese people and their military fought back with great courage. They used their air defense systems and shot down many of the B-52s and other planes during the operation. For 12 days, Hanoi and other cities in North Vietnam were heavily bombed. Over 20,000 tons of bombs were dropped, and thousands of civilians were killed. Many villages, schools, and hospitals were completely destroyed. About 85% of the people in Hanoi had to leave the city to stay safe. The United States suffered heavy losses in the Vietnam War. More than 58,000 American soldiers were killed, and hundreds of thousands were wounded. The U.S. also lost over 3,000 aircraft and thousands of helicopters, tanks, and other military equipment. Beyond the battlefield, the war caused deep economic strain, costing the U.S. more than $120 billion at the time. The financial burden, together with rising oil prices and inflation, contributed to a long period of economic difficulties in the 1970s. The war also left lasting scars on American society, dividing public opinion and shaping U.S. foreign policy for decades. Finally, in 1973, a peace agreement was signed in Paris. It was called the Paris Peace Accords. The agreement said that the United States would take all of its soldiers out of Vietnam. It also said that North and South Vietnam would stop fighting, but the peace did not last. Part 6: The Final Push and Reunification, 1973 to 1975. The Paris Peace Accords of 1973 were supposed to end the war, but they did not. The fighting between North and South Vietnam continued. The United States was no longer in the war. They had taken all their soldiers out, but they were still giving money and weapons to the South Vietnamese government. But the government in the South was very weak. The South Vietnamese army was not very strong, and the government was still very corrupt. In the North, the government was very strong and very determined. They believed that they had to unite the country. They believed in their cause. The North Vietnamese army began to prepare for a big final attack on the South. In 1975, the North Vietnamese army launched a series of big attacks on many different fronts across South Vietnam. The South Vietnamese army, which no longer had the American military fighting with them, quickly began to lose. Without the support of American soldiers, the South Vietnamese army was not strong enough to stop the attacks. City after city in the South fell very fast. The final campaign was called the Ho Chi Minh Campaign. It began on April 26, 1975, and ended on April 30, 1975, with the fall of Saigon. The North Vietnamese army entered Saigon and took control of the city. The South Vietnamese government officially surrendered, and the war was over. For the Vietnamese people, this day is called Reunification Day. On this day, the country was finally united. The long war was over. The fighting, which had gone on for decades, finally stopped. The two parts of Vietnam became one country again, with the North Vietnamese government in charge. The name of the country was changed to the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Saigon was renamed Ho Chi Minh City to honor the leader of the revolution. For the Vietnamese people, the fight for independence from 1946 to 1975 came at a terrible cost. About 4 million Vietnamese people died during this time. The long war also destroyed the country's economy and held back its development. After the war, the U.S. placed an economic embargo on Vietnam, which was not lifted until 1995 by U.S. President Bill Clinton. Even after reunification, Vietnam had to face new challenges. The country had to start a new war, sometimes called the Third Indochina War, which lasted from 1979 to 1989. In the north, Vietnam had to fight against an invasion by China. In the south, Vietnam had to fight against the Chinese-backed Khmer Rouge forces. From that time until today, Vietnam has gradually integrated into the world and grown stronger. Its old enemies have become its top partners. Vietnam has quickly built its reputation and influence on the international stage. Today, Vietnam is a country that is a symbol of freedom, peace, and friendship.